December 1944. Western Europe was supposed to be quiet. After the brutal breakout from Normandy and the liberation of Paris, Allied commanders believed Nazi Germany was finished. The German army was retreating on all fronts, short on fuel, short on men, and under relentless pressure from both East and West. Many officers quietly believed the war in Europe would end within months. They were wrong. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, Adolf Hitler was preparing one final, desperate gamble, an offensive so bold, so reckless, that even his own generals doubted it could succeed. The plan was simple in concept and insane in execution. Smash through the thinly defended American lines, cross the Meuse River, seize Antwerp, and split the Allied armies in two. If it worked, it would force the Western Allies into negotiations. If it failed, Germany would have nothing left. At dawn on December 16, 1944, the world changed. Under the cover of thick fog and heavy snowfall, more than 200,000 German troops, supported by over 1,000 tanks and assault guns, erupted out of the Ardennes forest. Artillery thundered across the quiet front. American positions were hit with overwhelming force. Units that expected a calm winter rotation suddenly found themselves under full-scale assault. This was not a probing attack. This was a full-blown invasion. The German offensive achieved total surprise. Allied air power, usually decisive, was grounded by the worst winter weather in years. Visibility dropped to near zero. Roads turned into sheets of ice. Communication lines broke down. Confusion spread rapidly through American headquarters. Within hours, German armored spearheads punched deep into the U.S. lines. Entire American regiments were shattered or forced to retreat. Command posts were overrun. Supply depots were captured intact. For the first time since D-Day, the initiative belonged entirely to Germany. The Allies would later call it the Battle of the Bulge. But in those first days, it felt like catastrophe. The road to Bastogne at the heart of the German plan was a network of narrow roads winding through the Ardennes. These roads were essential for moving fuel, troops, and armor forward. Control them, and the offensive could advance. Lose them, and everything would collapse. One town mattered more than all the others. Bastogne, a modest Belgian town with no great strategic value, except for one critical detail. 7 major roads converged there. For the Germans, Bastogne was a gateway. For the Americans, it was a choke point that could stop the entire offensive. As German forces surged westward, Allied commanders scrambled to plug the gaps. Among the few units available was the 101st Airborne Division, resting in France after months of combat. They were exhausted, understrength, and unprepared for immediate action. They were rushed to Bastogne anyway. With little warning, minimal artillery support, and inadequate winter clothing, the paratroopers dug in around the town just as German armor closed in from all sides. By December 20th, Bastogne was completely encircled. No reinforcements, no clear supply lines, no reliable air support. Inside the perimeter, the situation grew grim by the hour. Ammunition ran low. Medical supplies were nearly gone. Wounded soldiers lay freezing in makeshift aid stations. German artillery pounded the town day and night. Tanks probed American defenses. Infantry assaults tested every weak point. The weather grew colder. Snow piled higher. Frostbite claimed almost as many men as enemy fire. German commanders sent an ultimatum demanding surrender. The American response would become legendary. Nuts. But defiance alone could not save Bastogne. From the Allied perspective, the situation looked hopeless. A strategic nightmare at Supreme Headquarters, intelligence reports painted a bleak picture. German forces had advanced further than expected. The Allied front was bent backward into a massive bulge. Communications between units were chaotic. Some commanders feared a complete breakthrough. Worst of all, the Allies had no immediate counterattack ready. Standard estimates suggested it would take at least 3 weeks to reorganize forces, redeploy divisions, and mount a coordinated response. Time the defenders of Bastogne did not have. Every day the town remained surrounded increased the risk of collapse. And yet, somewhere in France, one man had been preparing for exactly this moment. While many Allied leaders believed a German offensive was unlikely in winter, General George S. Patton thought otherwise. Aggressive, controversial, and famously unpredictable, Patton had long suspected that Germany would strike when the Allies felt safest. Unlike others, he refused to be surprised. The calm before the question on December 19, 1944, senior Allied commanders gathered in Verdun for an emergency conference. The mood was tense. Maps covered the walls, marked with red arrows showing the German advance. Every hour brought new bad news from the front. General Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a critical decision. If the German offensive was not stopped quickly, the entire Allied campaign in Western Europe could unravel. He needed a rapid, decisive response, something no one believed possible. Then Eisenhower turned to Patton. The question was simple. "George, when can you attack?" The room fell silent. Most officers expected an answer measured in weeks. Patton did not hesitate. The 22nd of December. Patton's answer that shocked the war room in Verdun was silent. Maps of Western Europe covered the walls, pinned with red arrows that marked the German advance. Thick lines showed broken American units. Question marks filled the Ardennes. Officers leaned forward, tired, tense, and uncertain. General Dwight D. Eisenhower had just asked a question that carried the weight of the entire war in Western Europe. "George, when can you attack?" Everyone expected hesitation. Everyone expected excuses. They did not expect Patton's answer. Without pausing, without consulting a map, without asking for clarification, "General George S." Patton replied. The 22nd of December. A few officers blinked, convinced they had misheard. Patton continued, "With 3 divisions." For a moment, no one spoke. Then disbelief spread across the room. 3 days. 3 divisions. In the middle of winter. Against a massive German offensive. To most of the men present, Patton's statement sounded less like confidence and more like madness. Why it seemed impossible the problem was not courage. It was physics. Patton's Third Army was positioned far to the south, facing east toward Germany. To relieve Bastogne, Patton would have to do something no army had ever done at that scale. Rotate an entire field army 90 degrees, pivoting from east to north, and then drive over 100 kilometers through snow-covered roads, destroyed bridges, and total logistical chaos. This was not a small force. The Third Army consisted of hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, artillery pieces, fuel convoys, medical units, engineers, and supply columns stretching for miles. Every division depended on fuel. Every tank depended on roads. Every road was frozen, blocked, or bombed, and the weather made everything worse. Snowstorms grounded aircraft. Temperatures plunged well below freezing. Engines failed. Men collapsed from exhaustion and frostbite. Under normal conditions, such a maneuver would take weeks. Patton had promised to do it in 3 days. Many officers in the room quietly assumed he was exaggerating or lying to boost morale. They were wrong. Patton's secret advantage, what no one else in the room fully understood, was this. Patton had already started. For weeks, Patton had been quietly planning for a German winter offensive. While others believed the enemy was finished, he insisted his staff prepare 3 contingency plans, each one designed for a sudden German attack from a different direction. When the Ardennes offensive began on December 16th, Patton did not panic. He executed a plan. Orders had already been drafted. Routes had already been studied. Commanders had already been warned. Even before the meeting at Verdun, Patton had begun repositioning units and alerting his logistics officers. The attack date he gave Eisenhower was not a guess. It was a deadline. Eisenhower's gamble. Eisenhower understood the risk. If Patton failed, the Third Army could become trapped or shattered. The Allies would lose one of their most aggressive commanders and possibly the war's momentum. But Eisenhower also understood something else. Patton was the only man who had even prepared for this moment. After a brief pause, Eisenhower made his decision. Patton would attack on December 22nd. The fate of Bastogne now rested on Patton's ability to do the impossible. Turning an army in motion the moment Patton left Verdun, the Third Army went into controlled chaos. Headquarters issued rapid-fire orders. Divisions were rerouted. Entire supply chains were reversed overnight. Traffic jams stretched for miles as columns of trucks, tanks, and artillery attempted to move north along narrow, icy roads. Military police stood at intersections day and night, directing traffic with flashlights in blinding snow. One wrong turn could block an entire corps. Engines froze. Bridges collapsed. Vehicles slid into ditches. Patton was everywhere, shouting, pushing, threatening, inspiring. He relieved officers who hesitated. He promoted those who moved fastest. He demanded speed above all else. To Patton, time was blood. Discipline under pressure. Patton's reputation for harsh discipline now proved essential. Unlike other armies, the Third Army moved as a single organism. Units did not wait for perfect conditions. They moved when ordered, regardless of weather or fatigue. Drivers slept in their seats. Mechanics repaired engines in the snow. Engineers rebuilt bridges under artillery fire. Patton famously told his officers, "If you don't get there fast enough, you won't get there at all." Every hour mattered. A prayer for the weather, yet even Patton knew one thing could still doom the operation: the weather. Without air support, German forces held the advantage. Allied fighter-bombers were grounded, while German armor moved freely beneath the clouds. On December 23rd, Patton took an unusual step. He summoned his chaplain. Patton ordered him to write a prayer, not for victory, but for clear weather. The prayer was printed and distributed to tens of thousands of soldiers. Within 24 hours, the skies began to break. For many men, it felt like a miracle. First contact on December 22nd, exactly as promised, the Third Army attacked. American units slammed into German southern flanks, catching them off guard. German commanders had not believed Patton could move so quickly. Some reports dismissed the early clashes as minor probing attacks. They were wrong. Patton's forces were coming in strength. The fighting was brutal. German units fought desperately, aware that if Patton broke through, the entire Ardennes offensive would collapse. Villages changed hands multiple times. Roads became killing zones. Snow turned red. But the momentum was now shifting. The clock is running inside Bastogne. The men of the 101st Airborne were barely holding on. They had no idea when, or if, help would arrive. They only knew the shelling had intensified. Every gunshot, every explosion, every distant engine noise made men wonder, is that the enemy or Patton?
The impossible pivot: how Patton moved an army through hell. By December 23, 1944, the Third Army was no longer preparing to move. It was already in motion. What followed was one of the greatest logistical feats in military history, not because it was elegant, but because it worked under conditions that should have made it fail. Patton was not just moving divisions. He was moving an entire war machine, an army on frozen roads. The Ardennes was not built for modern warfare. Narrow roads twisted through forests and villages never meant to carry endless convoys of tanks and trucks. Snow turned highways into ice. Wrecked vehicles blocked intersections. Refugees fled in the opposite direction, clogging every route north. At night, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Drivers followed the faint red glow of tail lights ahead of them, praying the vehicle in front would not stop suddenly. A single breakdown could freeze an entire column for hours. Yet the columns kept moving, day and night, without pause, without margin for error. Patton's headquarters tracked every unit like a living map. If one road became blocked, units were rerouted instantly. Military police redirected traffic at gunpoint if necessary. Speed mattered more than comfort. Movement mattered more than rest. Fuel, the lifeblood of the advance. The greatest enemy was not the German army. It was fuel. Every tank required thousands of liters to reach the front. Every truck consumed precious gasoline on icy roads. Supply depots had to be emptied, relocated, and reconnected to advancing units in real time. If fuel failed, the attack would die where it stood. Patton's logisticians performed near miracles. Fuel convoys moved without headlights. Drivers navigated by memory and instinct. Engines ran continuously to avoid freezing solid. One officer later said, "We were not supplying an army. We were chasing it." Men at the breaking point. The physical toll was extreme. Soldiers slept wherever they collapsed, in barns, ditches, trucks, or snowbanks. Frostbite spread rapidly. Fingers blackened. Feet went numb. Many men fought in summer uniforms. Medical units struggled to treat the wounded while constantly relocating. Field hospitals were set up and dismantled within hours. Yet morale held, not because conditions were good, but because the mission was clear. Bastogne must be reached. German miscalculation. German commanders did not believe what was happening. Reports from the southern flank suggested large American formations were moving north at unprecedented speed. Many dismissed the reports as exaggerated. An entire American army could not pivot this fast. That assumption was fatal. As Patton's spearheads smashed into German positions, the enemy was forced to divert tanks and infantry away from Bastogne, weakening the siege without realizing it. Every kilometer Patton advanced tightened the noose around the German offensive itself. Breakthrough under fire. By December 25th, Patton's lead elements were within striking distance. The fighting intensified. German units, now desperate, defended villages fiercely. Roads were mined. Artillery fire turned intersections into death traps. Tanks dueled at point-blank range in narrow streets. Progress was measured in meters. But Patton pushed harder. He ordered attacks at dawn, at dusk, and through the night. He refused pauses that would allow the Germans to regroup. Every delay meant more dead inside Bastogne. Inside the pocket, inside the encircled town, conditions were unbearable. The wounded piled up. Ammunition was rationed. Food ran dangerously low. Men fought with the knowledge that no relief was guaranteed. Yet they held, not because they were certain of rescue, but because surrender was unthinkable. The sound of distant artillery from the south gave them hope. Someone was coming. December 26, 1944. Just after midday, American tanks from the 4th Armored Division broke through German lines near the village of Ardennes. They pushed north. A Sherman tank burst through enemy fire and rolled into Bastogne. The siege was broken. Men emerged from foxholes, stunned, exhausted, and frozen, but alive. Patton had kept his promise. 6 days that changed the war. From the moment Eisenhower asked the question in Verdun to the moment Bastogne was relieved, only 6 days had passed. 6 days of movement. 6 days of combat. 6 days that rewrote what armies were believed capable of doing. The German offensive would continue for weeks, but its momentum was gone. The impossible had been done.